Right, so for all of the hype over the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans with some countries, such as Hungary as an example, who are signed up to the ICC rulings, signed up to the Rome Statute they are based on, are overtly saying they won't fulfil their legal obligations. But even worse than such blatant cherry-picking of which rulings to follow than that, are nations that make claims that they would meet such obligations, but then commit acts that give you every reason to doubt that if it ever came down to it in practice. Just days after the ICC arrest warrants were issued, one person who at one point was allegedly facing an arrest warrant himself, implying that they certainly have questions to answer when it comes to the atrocities Israel at the ICJ and some of its leaders at the ICC ought to be answering, was Herzi Halevi, Israel's military chief of staff, the guy the IDF all answer to. And yet in those days following the ICC arrest warrants coming out, Halevi visited Britain and was given the cover of diplomatic immunity when he did so, rendering him free of any and all allegations of criminal actions and free of the risk of arrest in relation to any said allegations. If he wasn't guilty of something, he wouldn't have needed such immunity. If he didn't need to answer questions on something, he wouldn't have needed such immunity. So does this not tell you what would happen in reality if Benjamin Netanyahu were ever to come here? And for all of Labour's claims that they would arrest him and hand him over to the ICC, is it not in all likelihood just another one of Starmer's long track record of lies? Right, so breathtaking arrogance on the part of the Starmer regime is nothing new to many of us who have been following the appalling conduct and antics of this Labour government since they took power in July, from scandals to downright lethal budget choices to bending over constantly in support of the genocidal apartheid state of Israel led by Benjamin Netanyahu. The optics of this are rightly terrible, and Starmer and co have rightly come in for significant flack over this, nothing seemingly shifting their stances ever, no matter what atrocities Israel carries out next. And all of the donations individual MPs, not least Starmer himself, have received all give the impression of being very much bought and paid for to maintain said positions, demanded of by their donors, and not serving the people of this country who actually voted them in. The ICC finally, after months of hold-ups of course, and in no small part was that thanks to the UK government itself, issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant on the 21st of November. Finally action was being taken, we thought, or would, should either of these two individuals choose to visit a country signed up to the Rome Statute, which is the basis upon which the International Criminal Court is built. Gallant, we know, visited the US earlier this month, which met with huge furore in the States, but they are not signed up to the ICC, therefore we're not under obligation to detain Gallant, though the optics were no less damaging, of course. The outgoing Biden administration simply never learning that their own people are utterly disgusted by such an act being taken, and why they've been voted out. Yet here in the UK we're really no better, since we pulled this stunt in effect as well, before Gallant's trip to the US no less. Only Starmer and co tried to keep it quiet, it seems. With those arrest warrants having been issued on the 21st of November, just 4 days later, on the 25th of November, the IDF's chief, Herzi Halevi, was welcomed to the UK with full diplomatic immunity applied, because nothing screams innocent quite like that, does it? Blocking any chance of an arrest or being brought in for questioning ahead of time. Halevi's name, it mustn't be forgotten, was in amongst the mix of individuals for whom the ICC at one point was building a case against, ahead of the issuing of arrest warrants. Now that would have progressed even that far if there weren't ample reason to do so, would it? As head of the IDF, he was clearly a relevant candidate at that. And there are numerous examples of actions committed by the IDF that would warrant at least questioning of Halevi in relation to them. One of the most notable examples, and a prime example of why this immunity was given by Britain of all places, being so bad, was the fact that Halevi himself oversaw the drone attack back in April that targeted the World Central Kitchen aid trucks, killing several of their workers, who had handed the IDF their planned route to deliver aid ahead of time, and ended up targeted by rocket fire, and amongst those dead were of course 3 British nationals. Opportunity to question Halevi in relation to that, and Starmer's government opted to tie their hands instead. Now just because Halevi wasn't eventually named in the ICC's arrest warrants that were issued, doesn't mean Britain didn't have an obligation to those families of those workers who his orders saw killed. But equally, we are quite capable of issuing arrest warrants or rescinding certificates of immunity, as was issued to Halevi, should the case for that be made. There is such a thing as universal jurisdiction legislation, which allows for those serious crimes to be prosecuted no matter where they occur. And with 3 British deaths allegedly on his hands, there was ample justification that UK law could have done such a thing with Herzi Halevi. So why did Halevi even come here then? Why did he make this trip? Certainly with immunity having been issued, he didn't need to fear arrest. Seems Israel can guarantee Starmer and co will keep their word to them, if certainly not to us here in the UK. But there had to be a good reason for the military chief to come here, when certainly you'd imagine he's quite busy with the job of committing war crimes on behalf of the Blue and White State. Clues are with who he met, because Halevi met with UK defence chiefs and the Attorney General Richard Hermer. A good guess would be that it relates therefore to ongoing military support to Israel from the UK, and probably how to get around the UK's obligations under international law. That is just the knee-jerk place your mind straight away goes to, isn't it, given the quisling acquiescence in the name of Israel we always see from this Starmer government. Of course, none of this would have been known about if the question of Halevi's presence here in the UK hadn't been flagged up. And for that we have Green Party peer Natalie Bennett to thank, who put the question to Labour peer Vernon Coker on the 9th of December, the matter of Halevi's presence in the UK, submitting a question which read, to ask His Majesty's government whether they invited Chief of the General Staff of the Israeli Defence Forces Herzi Halevi to visit the UK this month, and if so, for what reason, and which senior UK officials he met. Coker replied to this with, as part of the concerted UK effort, along with allies and partners, to reach a peaceful resolution to the ongoing conflicts in Lebanon and Gaza, the Chief of the Defence Staff hosted his counterparts from Israel and other international partners on Monday 25th of November. The Deputy Chief of Defence Staff, Military Strategy and Operations, and the FCDO Director for the Middle East and North Africa both attended the meeting. The Attorney General, the Right Honourable Lord Hermer KC, also held his own respective meeting with Lieutenant General Halevi. Discussions recognised Israel's right to security, as well as including the UK calls for an immediate ceasefire in both Lebanon and Gaza, the need for greater humanitarian access into Gaza, the release of all hostages, and the requirement for all parties to comply with international humanitarian law. We continue to work with international partners to encourage de-escalation and promote long-term peace and security in the Middle East. Didn't answer the question as to whether Halevi was therefore invited by the UK to attend, though, did he? Guilt by omission? Well, we can postulate, can't we? But really it's a question that does need answering, because it's so much worse if Halevi did come here by invite. But that absolutely could and should have been an opportunity to question the guy, at the very least, about the deaths of those British nationals. But also in respect of what the hell they think they're doing, given we supply them with so much arms and most especially military assistance, especially intelligence via those RAF flights from the UK base on Cyprus. That not even British lives apparently were worth enough to warrant even questioning means this rancid government degrades and demeans us even further. And it is a point hammered home by SNP MP Chris Law when he spoke to Middle East Eye about this, saying, Law told Middle East Eye it is breathtaking, indeed astounding, that the UK Labour government thought it appropriate to issue a special mission immunity certificate to Herzi Halevi, Chief of the General Staff of the Israeli Defence Forces, just 2 days after the ICC issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. This behaviour suggests that the UK government has no interest in seeking justice for victims of alleged war crimes and is instead focused on protecting its Israeli allies from facing any accountability. It is even more staggering that Halevi was given this immunity, given he was reported to have been considered by the ICC for an arrest warrant, he added. He called on Foreign Secretary David Lammy to explain the appalling timing of this decision and the purpose of these special mission immunity certificates, particularly as they have been issued exclusively to Israeli officials this year. For as long as states such as the UK continue to use these measures to protect those accused of breaches of international law, it will erode trust in itself as a legitimate partner in the international community and will undermine international humanitarian law it claims to support. Certificates of immunity have only been issued to Israeli officials this year by Starmer and co, and we deserve to know why. We all deserve answers for this. It all smacks of a bit of a conspiracy to keep arms sales going and find legal routes around that, as well as legal routes around the arrest warrants issued against Netanyahu and Gallant. So that needs clarifying. But the issue of a certificate of immunity to someone, or the issuing of a certificate of immunity to someone who nearly had an arrest warrant issued against them too by the ICC, really doesn't inspire confidence that if push comes to shove, Netanyahu could come to Britain and leave again without any trouble. Starmer has previous for this at that, and if you haven't heard about his time as Director of Public Prosecutions and the curious case of Zippy Livni, then please do look that up, because actually this course of action by him oughtn't actually surprise us too much. Meanwhile, if this isn't scandalous enough for Starmer's lot, the small matter of arms sales licences to Israel has cropped up again. You might recall that we banned 30 out of 350 export licences to Israel back in September to no applause at all. Didn't go nearly far enough. But apparently it went far too far for Starmer's lot, since they've issued another 34 of them since. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so and help support the channel. Massively appreciated as that is. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.